everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to just do a couple of housekeeping. If you did hear me before, excuse me. I'm going to just do this again. Hi, Lillian. Wow, that was just a weird start to our day. Thank you for joining us, the people that are here in the watching the webinar. If you have any questions throughout the session, ask us in the chat box on the right anytime. And if for any reason you drop out like we just did, you can always press reconnect at the top of your screen or log back in via the email link. And if you can't hear us, try and log out and log back in again. If there's any internet issues, the replay is available and will be sent to you shortly after this session. So don't worry if you have to leave and go to other commitments. A replay will come your way. So today we're speaking to Lillian, and Lillian is a first-generation Chinese-Australian woman and stage manager from Sydney, Australia. Her work across theatre, dance, circus, spectacle and major events is deeply rooted in inclusive, collaborative and culturally considered practices. Lillian was most recently the stage manager for Michelle Law's trilingual production Miss Peony at Belvoir. And from 2018 to 2020, Lillian was the resident stage manager of Bangarra Dance Theatre, Australia's premier Indigenous Dance Company, and toured regionally, nationally and internationally with productions of Our Land People, Stories, Dark Emu, Bennelong and 30 Years of 65,000 and Spirit. She's toured to India, Japan, Canada and the USA. Other theatre credits as a stage manager include the premier national tour of Drummer Queens, The Gruffalo's Child, Chrysalis, The Village Bike and Champions. Event credits include WugulOra Indigenous Morning Ceremony 2020 as showcaller, Bondi Feast, Sydney's Writers' Festival as stage manager, the Lord Mayor's Picnic in Sydney, and recently Lillian was elected to the Board of Directors for the newly formed Australian Stage Managers Association, which we'll talk about, and is committed to uplifting the work of and educating young Indigenous, Black and people of colour stage managers and theatre practitioners of Australia and abroad. Lillian has tutored in dance for stage management at NIDA and spoken as a panellist on supporting Indigenous performance for a USITT's National Collaborators Conference. She's a graduate of NIDA, National Institute of Dramatic Arts, for those who are maybe not in Australia and don't know that institution. Everybody in Australia does. And she's mental health first aid trained. Lillian, welcome to Theatre Art Life.
Hello, thank you for having me.
You have packed a lot into your very short years as a stage manager. It's wonderful.
Gotta love that hustle.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So let's just talk with me a little bit before we go into your career and the things that you're very passionate about, and I love to talk about those things. Right now, let's just talk about where you're at now. You're going to Dubai right now. You've just been through the pandemic in Australia. Tell us a little bit about that.
So currently in Sydney, we are in, I think, week 6 of lockdown. I think we're about 70 days into a full lockdown, so no theatres are open, no shops are open. As of tomorrow, you can't even receive post from providers. They're not posting parcels for the next week because the post system is completely overwhelmed. But I am actually headed to Dubai on Tuesday to work with the expo team on in the main plaza in Wassel. So I'm very excited to be starting that gig. I don't really know a lot about it at the moment, but it's my first major international move. So there's a lot happening.
Wonderful. And what's been happening in the art scene for those who are overseas in terms of shows are on, shows are off? What's happening in Australia with regards to the COVID pandemic?
Yeah, so it has been a really tumultuous time. The way that lockdowns happen, they happen from state to state. So it could be that theatre is being performed in one state, but not in another. In New South Wales, unfortunately, at the moment, our numbers have been really high. So when the pandemic happened in March 2020, some companies continued working and some shut down completely. It's always at the discretion of the company. And then in around October, September of 2020, we restarted. So I was really lucky to jump onto a kids show, a little touring kids show, and we were one of the first companies back touring Australia during that time, but obviously with a lot of conditions, a lot of rules, a lot of COVID tests. And then, you know, we had a period where we were completely open, where we had 0 cases in Australia. And then recently we've just had a really big outbreak with the Delta variant, and the industry is essentially shut down now. And that's across the board. WA is still performing. The WA Ballet just closed a show and they're going to do one more. But in Brisbane, in the East Coast, we're basically completely shut down.
So a lot of arts workers locked in their houses like the rest of the country at the moment, yeah?
Yeah, a lot of arts workers unemployed, which is a really it's a really hard time for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess it's pretty fortunate that you've got a job in Dubai right now, just to go out there and start getting back into it. But it's from country to country. It's been a very tough thing, and even moving between countries will be a thing, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's a very strange thing to try and move houses, or to pack up your house and move countries in the middle of a pandemic. And especially here in Australia, there are a lot of federal rules about traveling between states, but also you have to apply for an exemption to leave the country.
Yeah.
And then there's that long, stressful wait of, will I get approved? Will I not? Even if you have a job, you might not get approved.
So let's tell us a little bit about, a little bit before COVID, there was an industry that worked at it. You've been working in Australia for some time. So you did your degree at NIDA, and what's the pathway for stage managers to get work, obtain work in Australia? What are the conditions in which they do that?
So NIDA is a generalist course. You learn everything. So not everyone who graduates is necessarily a stage manager, but I went in knowing that I wanted to be a stage manager. I went in knowing that the reason I was obtaining this training was because I wanted to work in large scale productions. I wanted to work in circus. Like, it's cliche to say, but Cirque du Soleil is my dream. Dragon is my dream still. But here it's not, I'm not entirely across what hiring is like in other countries, because I've only ever worked here basically. But it's a lot to do with reputation. You apply, so you kind of line up, you kind of find out when season launches are, or when a company might be announcing their next year's worth of shows, and then you email like the resident stage manager, you email TDs, and you send in your resume, and you kind of hope for the best. You kind of ask for references, or ask for a coffee, have a meet. Yeah, I mean, I would call myself a very early career stage manager, and I was very lucky. I got this role at Bangara as a resident really early in my career, and that came through connections working on events. So I worked on an event called Sydney Writers Festival. I met a sound designer who happened to be the sound designer, the resident sound designer at Bangara, and he really liked me. And when the job came up, he sent me the link and he said, you should apply for this. But I went through a regular hiring process, the same as everyone else. And my success in obtaining that job was very much to do with the connections that I made on other jobs.
Absolutely. I even back when I was in Australia, I felt that was exactly the same story. So it hasn't changed.
No, it hasn't changed. You're always knocking on people's doors like, hello, can you come in, please? I would love to work with you.
The constant hustle.
Yeah, constant hustle.
And what was it like working for Bangarra Dance Theatre? I mean, you've done you did a few shows with them, and you went on tour with them. So that must have been a wonderful, like you said, early career experience for you.
Yeah, I spent 3 years with Bangara. It was an incredibly informative experience for me as a stage manager as well. I graduated from NIDA, spent a year as a freelancer doing any job that would take me, and then I was lucky enough to get this job in my second year out. At that time I was the youngest stage manager to ever work for the company. I was the first female stage manager that they had in quite a while, and I was also their first POC stage manager as well. So it was a lot to navigate, and also working in an Indigenous company, there's protocols, there's understandings, there's ways of navigating a space that you don't necessarily belong in as a non-Indigenous person. And, I'm not going to lie, I put my foot in it quite a lot in my first year. I learned a lot. I had to ask a lot of questions. I had to apologize a lot. But it was incredible. I was very privileged to have that role and to cultivate my own practice and how I see, and it really changed my ideas of stage management too. You know, in Indigenous companies, you know, these senses of urgency, these senses of perfectionism, these almost very colonialist ideas of stage management don't exist, or not that they don't exist, they exist because we absolutely perform within a Western framework, but within the company itself, you have to navigate the hierarchy of those things.
And for our international audience, can you just describe what Bangarra Dance Theatre is for those who may not be aware of its Indigenous background?
Yeah, sure. So Bangara is Australia's leading Indigenous dance company. It was started 30 years ago by a man called Stephen Page. Carol Johnson was actually the initial, one of the initial founders as well. He was an American, Black American dancer. And it is a company of entirely Indigenous dancers. They perform in a style that is both rooted in tradition and traditional stories, but it's also blended with contemporary styles of dance. So the dancers are really highly trained. They're contemporary dancers, they're ballet dancers, but they also are very deeply rooted to cultural traditions of dance and storytelling through music as well. And also part of Bangara's work is social outreach. So every show features stories taken from community, and they work really hard to ensure that these stories are appropriately gifted, they're appropriately told, and they're appropriately then returned to community as well. And they have incredible education programs as well, and educating young Indigenous performers as well. So really incredible space to be in.
And with those, how are those shows received overseas? Because it says did you take those shows to India, Japan, Canada, and USA, right?
Yeah, incredibly. I mean, we always had incredible audiences, incredible responses. I think because it's, if you ever just have a look up Bangara on YouTube, their style is like unlike anything you will ever see. It's incredibly athletic, but also incredibly lyrical and beautiful. And yeah, it's, sorry.
It's all good.
Got where the question was going.
We were just saying that international audiences tend to be very, very receptive to that work. Yeah.
Yes.
Amazing.
Yes, purely for the difference of it as well, but also I think it taps into this idea of deep-rooted culture.
That's really important. So tell us a little bit about the Stage Managers Association, and it's just so recently been formed, and then your part in it, and then and what your goal of being a part of that association is.
Yeah, sure. So the Stage Managers Association, we started as a working group, and we issued a survey to try and survey all the stage managers in Australia, find out what their interests were, find out if this is an association is something that they wanted, and we had a really resounding positive result from that. So we recently incorporated, and we've elected a board of directors. So I am sitting on the board of directors, which is really, really exciting. And I think for me personally, being on the association is a platform and a chance for me to champion and advocate for Black, Indigenous, POC voices in stage management. I think we're really absolutely lacking representation in stage management in Australia. And I can only hope that my part encourages other young POC stage managers to continue and pursue their careers, but also as a safe space for them to reach out and maybe ask for advice or guidance or advocacy as well. And I think Stage Managers Association is something that we've really wanted and needed in Australia for a long time. I think that there's stage management can be a very lonely profession, and in Australia where there's very few jobs, but also very small teams, it can be a very lonely place as well. And for stage managers in Australia to feel like there's a community and somewhere to go when they have problems, or even when they just need advice, or community is a really important thing. And I think that I really hope that it's something that we can do with this association as we move forward as well.
Is there anything about the survey that was done that surprised you?
Nothing surprising, but also shocking. So we surveyed 477 stage managers across Australia. And of that, we only, obviously it doesn't catch everyone, but it does give a really good sense of what our industry looks like in terms of who are the people working, who are full-timers, who works contract to contract, who's freelancing, but also the makeup of the stage managers in Australia. And it was really shocking to see, and unfortunately not unexpected, having worked here for a few years, but it was still shocking nonetheless to see that only 5 of those 477 identified as Indigenous or Torres Strait Islander, and only 17 identified as a person of colour of 477. And I think it really shows a glaring lack of diversity in our industry here.
And why do you think that is, in your opinion?
I can only speak for myself and my experiences, but it's to do with access. It's to do with access and representation and visibility of representation. I think that, when I was starting out, I didn't see any other stage managers who looked like me. And my stage management role models are people who live overseas: Cherry Tay, Cody, Renard, Richard, people who aren't working in Australia. And that's part of the problem. But also, I think it also comes down to the fact that there's cultural issues at play. I'm a first generation migrant. I'm still battling ideas of cultural expectations of what a career looks like and what success looks like. Definitely stage manager was not what my Chinese parents expected of me. And when I got into NIDA, the first thing my dad said to me was, "How much does a stage manager make in a year?" And I said, "Dad, can you just be happy for me that I'm doing something that I'm really passionate about?" But I think there's a lot of first generation migrants still battling those ideas of success, especially those in lower socioeconomic areas. And I think it's the same for Indigenous communities as well. I don't think the experiences are exactly the same. I think the Indigenous experience is very different to the migrant experience, obviously, but there is that cultural element where, you want to be able to, you want to be able to make money to send back to your families. There's still that social responsibility aspect of it, and maybe the arts is not a good place to do that. And then also there's issues of accessibility. The drama schools are glaringly white. When I was at NIDA, I was one of 3 Asians in the entire building. That includes the acting cohorts, the props cohorts. So out of 120 kids walking around the building, there was 3 people who looked a little bit like me, which there's a lot to be said about the safety of a space and seeing people who look like you in a space to make you feel safe. And not seeing that can be really confronting. And a lot of people do drop out because they feel like that space isn't for them. And so I think there's a long way to go for training institutions to diversify and to allow access. And maybe that means monetary financial access as well. Drama school is expensive. You can't work. You go to school 12, 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, and there's no time to do your casual job. And so you have to have financial privilege to be able to go to one of those institutions. And there's, in Australia especially, there is a there is a sense of elitism when you start to apply for jobs. They want to know that you've been to an institution. It's still the name, the weight of the name, the weight of the implications of the institution carry. And when you don't have access to those institutions, how do you begin your career?
Right. Yeah. It's really interesting because it's been a very hot topic throughout the pandemic in the USA. Do you think those conversations that have happened over there and the awareness and I guess there's been lots of social movement towards equity and diversity, on Broadway and in other areas across the country over there. Do you think that has exposed Australia, or do you think that shifted that awareness in Australia as well, or do you think that's just Australia's just coming to that realization now on its own?
No, I think we're definitely influenced by the Black Lives Matter movement in the States, but also here at home, we have our own Black Lives Matters movements. We have had our own protests. We do, deaths in custody is a really large issue here. And I think that I think the trickle down effect from the States is real. But I do also hope that we are coming to it in our own terms and we are negotiating it on our own terms, because Australia is not America. We have a different relationship with our Indigenous Torres Strait Islander peoples. We have a different relationship with migrant communities, and we have different sort of makeup of diasporas in Australia. So, and different issues of class as well, different issues of how financial privilege is distributed.
You made mention when you were talking about Bangara about the sort of, I guess, Western institution of theatrical practice. And before we were live and we could see each other, we were talking a little bit about how stage managers set the tone in a company. And what's your thoughts really on that responsibility? I think you've taken that on your shoulders in terms of joining the Stage Management Association and that sort of thing to highlight that. But I think in the way that I see it is a deconstruction of traditional Western practices to open it up to include all of that diversity, inclusion and awareness. And what do you think a stage manager's responsibility is in with that?
Yeah, I mean, I could bang on about this all day, and people who know me will know that I bang on about this all day, but I hope not to ever sound preachy about it. But I think that there has almost always been this false equivalency of stage managers and neutrality, especially white stage managers and neutrality, and the idea of that you can be completely unbiased and impartial. But I think what we're learning through racial discourse is there is no such thing as complete impartiality. Everyone is biased. Everyone holds the experiences of their body and their lived experiences. And stage managers have a responsibility to create safety in a room, to create safe spaces. I think that's I think that sits at the root of all stage management work, whether that's the very logistical, risk assessments to just how you set the tone of a room. And absolutely, stage managers are responsible for that, because you're the first point of contact when there's conflict. You're the first point of contact when there is an emergency. So how you approach a room, the energy that you bring into a room, the tone in terms of language that you set for a room is really important. Sorry, I'm just gathering my coherence. I will ramble about this all day if I don't.
No, it's totally fine. It's fine.
Form coherent thoughts. So, yeah, I think that it's very. I think there's a need for diversity because you as a stage manager, no matter what your ethnicity, culture, training is, you can bring a uniqueness to a room that creates safety for people. And in this, I think that we can it's very easy to become institutionalized by this, like as I said earlier, this Western system of theatre. I don't think it should be completely thrown out the door. I think, there are structures in place for a reason to keep us safe, but I think that we can now go beyond that, that black and white idea of safety, and, don't trip on this, tape the corners, don't fall over the cables, and sort of interrogate and think more deeply about pastoral care and how where stage managers sit within that, because I think as we start to create more diverse works, it's really confronting for, like, I just worked on Miss Peony, which is one of the first times that a trilingual Chinese production has ever been made in Australia, and to be in a room with majority Chinese Australian people, there's a lot of cultural there's a lot of culture that you bring into the room, and there's also this sense of urgency, because we don't know whether we'll ever be able to be given the space to tell these stories again, which absolutely we will be and we should be, but because when you're the first, you feel, like you said, the weight of the community, the weight of culture on your shoulders. And so these spaces can become really sticky and tenuous. And if you have a stage manager who can understand that, or at least see and acknowledge that and be sensitive to that, it creates a much safer process, and I think a better work as well.
No, that's really interesting that you say that. I think, and I think those works are very important for exposure to that diversity as well, right? So choice of content.
Yeah.
I remember years ago, I worked on a show in Marrickville Theatre. I don't know if it doesn't exist anymore. I don't know if it exists anymore, but it was a show called The Uncle from Australia, and it was written by a Greek-Australian playwright, and it was about, Greek immigrants in Australia. And even just for me, my own exposure and involvement to that show was eye-opening, because I'd never had that exposure to that kind of experience or life or existence in Australia from a migrant perspective. And not only did that feed out from the show that we were working on, but the way that we approached rehearsals, and the way that we would eat lunch together, and the way that we would, and for me, it was such an enjoyable experience for me, because it opened my eyes to this aspect of people who live in Australia that is completely different to me. And I think that's really important. So not only from a backstage point of view of setting the tone and all of that, but the choice of work and exposure. And that's always a hard thing for, I guess, for producers to make, because you're trying to create work that's going to make money, but then you're also trying to be culturally relevant and up to date. So navigating that whole thing is not easy. And then the stage management there in the middle of it. I wanted to also talk about, I know that's something that's come up recently, and you've got it on your CV, that you're mental health first aid trained. And this is not a nomenclature that other countries talk about. So can you just tell us a little bit about what is mental health first aid training, and how you use it in your workplace?
Yeah, I mean, I love to chuck it in there because I love to talk about it. There's this increasing idea, which I think is fantastic, that mental health is just as important as physical health. And I think especially in this day and age where people can burn out so quickly, but also that there is such a, we live in a really high anxiety times with COVID. So mental health aid training is a program exactly like first aid training, which in Australia is like a 2-day course, 8 hours a day. You get a manual, you read through it. You have a representative from the organization who comes and talks to you about it, teaches you how to do it. You do training scenarios. And it covers the gamut of things from anxiety to depression to, and apologies if I trigger anyone, to suicide, and how appropriate responses when you are presented with those situations. And I think it's really important for stage managers, because you often are presented with those situations, and sometimes you can't recognize that. Sometimes, it's knowing whether an actor is distressed because they're about to go on stage, or if there's something deeper going on. So I think courses like this are really important to for stage managers. And I think also the responsibility of providing them should fall, at least in Australia, the responsibility of providing first aid training to employees is the responsibility of the company. And I think that mental health should also sit amongst that. And I was really lucky at Bangara that they saw the importance of that and the need for that. And they sent myself and a few others to mental health first aid training. I think, and it also, as a stage manager, it helped me, come to terms with my own mental health and learn how to deal with my own mental health as well. So it both gives you strategies to stay mentally healthy so that you can be mentally healthy to help others as well.
Absolutely. And that can come down to, I was going to ask you because when you talk about mental health, it can go into those aspects of being burnt out and the conditions in which people work. Now, there's still no union involvement in Australia, correct, for people working in the arts. So how is the working conditions when you are on a show in terms of hours and expectations and the rules surrounding that?
So here in Australia, we have a union called the MEAA, which it's the union for all the performing arts, but it also covers journalists, film crew, TV crew, actors, and it also works for the producers as well. So it can be, I'm trying not to put my foot in it. It's not as active as I think the American unions are, especially for theatre workers. So oftentimes in Australia, you are negotiating your contract yourself, especially as a freelancer. You will often just receive your contract from a company direct to you, and it's the responsibility is on you to read it to make sure your clauses are acceptable. And it will absolutely differ from company to company. From some companies, you can be paid as little as, in Australia, $20 an hour, up to larger scales, which provide overtime, which provide time in lieu, which provide sick leave, and that is all at the discretion of the producers. And then it's your choice whether to sign or not. And especially for something that I've learned as an early career stage manager in the last few years is how to read those contracts. And it's something that when you're in drama school, you're like, I'll get to that. I'll learn that when I'm out there. But it is so important. If there's any young stage managers listening, learn how to read your contracts, learn about termination clauses, know your rights. We have an award here in Australia called the Live Performance Award. And it basically sets out the bare minimum of how performers, crew, technicians, stage managers, dancers, singers should be paid, at least a minimum. But even then, if you work for an independent company, they don't always adhere to the LPA. It's an award, it's a guide, not the rules. So it's really up to the onus really is on the individual to know their rights and know how to negotiate contracts, which is a tricky thing. It's looks like long legalese. And my hope with something like a Stage Managers Association is that we can provide the resources and the to people who may not know how to read contracts or may not know their rights and want to ask the questions.
I think something that you're not prepared for when you leave university is that you are your own business, right? And freelance work it's tough because while on face value the salary might be great, you might have a 2 or 3 month gap between that contract and the other contract, and so for getting that salary for that period of time, it's not covering the 6 months contract, it's covering the 9 month, the other 3 months around that you don't have work or may not, and it creates that cycle. And it's something that I know very early on I struggled with because I was not ready for the business of theatre. I was ready to be a stage manager, or I was ready to go out and work. But how do I manage, taking care of myself? Yeah, exactly. I'm also very passionate about bringing that up with younger stage managers as well. I didn't pay off my HECS debt till my late 20s, and then it wasn't until I got rid of certain debts that I could start to look around and go, okay, well, I better save up for retirement is a thing, I know you don't think about it when you're like 20 years old, but the earlier you start saving for that, the easier you are going to be able to achieve it.
Absolutely.
And, so I'm always like, we need to run a course that teaches everybody how to do it.
We do, because when you're in drama school, nobody pays attention in that one tax class that you do in 3 years. You do 1 4-hour tax class, at least when I was there. You do 1 4-hour tax class, and that's it. And nobody pays attention because it's boring.
Yeah.
But it's so important because you are your own business, or you're a mix of your own business and you're being paid by a company, which makes tax difficult. And something I'm really passionate about is, especially with young stage managers, and it's something that I hope to model in my own career as I go forward, is how to have a sustainable career. And I use the word sustainable because it's not just about it's physical, and also I'm a big environmental sustainability nut. I recycle everything, but also how to keep your career going towards retirement, how to be in this industry for 20, 30, 40 years, because that's something that I would love. And I would also love to have kids sometime during my career and still continue to work and not be forgotten or lose the momentum that I have. But also, maybe I want to buy a house one day, or maybe I want to, and it's a hard slog when you work in the arts and you don't, and you're also feeling like you have to stack jobs on each other, and that's how people burn out. You do back-to-back jobs. Often you're starting pre-prod for a show while you're still doing show call for another show. Which happens and is fine, but how you manage yourself, your finances, your ability to live and continue living your life rather than shutting down while you're working is really important to me.
You're going to lose it in Dubai when if you're a recycler.
I know. I'm already struggling.
The amount of plastic bottles that just sit on tables everywhere. It's really hard to deal with.
I know.
Especially when you're carrying your own portable. Yeah. And that's also, but that's interesting also because that you say that. I think that's a really admirable approach, and it's something that, thinking about your career holistically, because it's very easy to get lost in the contract to contract moment and trying to earn up a reputation. But having that macro view of trying to create a sustainable career is really important, and especially from a mentorship point of view for the longevity of your career as well in the arts. Because if people decide, no, I can't do this and have children, they leave the industry. And I think that's something that, if you read Teresa Fox's thesis, it does talk about some women leaving the industry so they can have a family. And that's something that if you've in an association, that perhaps those systemic things could be changed. And and then you've got the aspect of when you're thinking about tax, wait till you get to international tax.
I know. I'm already like, how do I do this? Call my accountant. So I'm learning all this. I'm going to be learning all this stuff for the first time. So it'll be really interesting and exciting. And I'm terrible. I'm not a finance oriented. I'm a child of an actuary and an accountant, and yet I am the least financially savvy person in the world.
They must be so disappointed.
I'm so disappointed. Oh my god. But they, I have to really batten down and absorb this knowledge, because it's going to make my life and my career better if I understand how tax thresholds work and how to manage my overseas finances, but also here at home, how I manage my finances as well. I think that a lot of when you start out in your career, you make your first paycheck and then you drink it all at the pub. And at some point, 6 years down the track, 10 years down the track, that's not sustainable. I remember a stage manager when I was at NIDA telling us this story of how she toured for years, decades, and didn't save a penny because she was drinking it and eating it. And that's fine. Some people like that. But she said, I regret that. Save that money. I live in a caravan now. Put your money aside for a house, or put your money aside for something that you have that 10, 20-year goal, because otherwise you lose track of it amidst the fun and the excitement. And,
No, that's super interesting. So what's the plans for the Stage Managers Association? I know it's newly formed, but like what's the first 6 months going to look like? Is there a strategy? Maybe you're still working that out, but
we're still working it out. I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to say.
Right.
So I can't speak to that much, but there is plans in the work. I would just say to folks, look out for Stage Managers Day, International Stage Managers Day. Things will be coming, but we are at the moment at the sort of heavy administrative end of, registering as a charity, getting together our business numbers, working out how to create a website, and so it's and we spent a really good 6 months just writing and editing and discussing our constitution and what that looks like as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we're still at that end of it. We're very fresh, so I can't really speak to what the next 6 months look like, but it's coming, it's happening. It's slow progress. We did a lot of research in the lead up and spoke to the stage managers associations in the US, in the UK, in India, and these things take time.
Of course, yeah.
I think the US association, even though they started, almost 50 years ago, I think someone will have to fact check me. They were saying that it took them a good 2-3 years to really get off the ground and gain momentum. So, we're at the infant stage. We haven't even learned to walk yet.
Mm-hmm.
But we have high hopes for it, and we really hope that the community feeds in as well, and that the Australian stage managers can continue to talk to us about what they want out of it as well, because I think it's important. We don't work in isolation.
If people are interested in sort of being involved, who should they be reaching out to? How do they contact you guys?
We have an email address, austagemanagers@gmail.com, but hopefully very soon we will have a website and more platforms to communicate with us on. But at the moment, austagemanagers@gmail.com.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And we would love to hear from people.
Amazing. And I just before we finish up, I think there's one thing that I think you're also very passionate about. And I think it comes back to diversifying stage management and everything. But we talked a little bit about mentorship, and I just want to touch on that in terms of the importance of mentorship, and how who's been a mentor in your life, but also how you would like to be mentors for others coming into the industry. So do you want to just touch on that?
Yeah, I had a really interesting start to mentorship. When you're at NIDA, you do shows, and you in first year you're an ASM, in second year you're a DSM, a calling stage manager, and in third year you're a PSM, GSM style, and they give you your head of stage management gives you a mentor for that period. And I didn't find a mentor during that time, but one of my friends did. I found a really incredible mentor, and I was always very envious of that. And so I've sort of made it my goal in my career as I've come out to seek mentorship, to talk to people. I think it's really important as a young stage manager to know the history of where you come from, to know the people who are in your industry who are working around you, and to look at people and go, that, they're my career goals, or they're someone I look up to. I would love to chat with them. My mentors are people like Rex Reese, like Adam Lowe, who worked in events for a very long time and was in Doha. Let me have a Peter Sutherland, who's a Queensland stage manager. Darren Kawaki, who worked in musical theatre for a good long time, who's a very good friend of mine. And I think that mentorship isn't as straightforward as like, oh, let's sit down once a week for an hour and you tell me everything you know. It's as simple as going to the pub with them and listening to their stories. I think that when you're starting out, it's really tempting to, like when you meet an older stage manager, tell them everything you know and try to prove yourself. But sometimes the best way to find mentorship and to learn is to just sit back and listen to people's stories. I think we learn lessons through stories because we can't be on every show. We can't work with every single person. So the way to learn is to listen to stories and to ask questions but not be pushy. And yeah, I mean, I'm always seeking mentors. I wouldn't say that is my list and that is my definitive list and that's done. I'm mentored. I would love to, continue to talk to other stage managers and learn from them. And then for myself, I would love to be a mentor. Maybe not right now, maybe not. Well, this is a serious case of imposter syndrome. I'm 6 years into my career. I'm like, what can I offer someone? But I actually really, like I haven't finished it. I'm not there yet.
But you are 6 years on from leaving, a university institution. So I do think that has value. And as we spoke about before, I think generationally, opinions, ideas, and shifts change. And I think your generation is far more on the mission for that equity, diversity, and sustainability, and also a lifestyle thing. And I think that mindset is a great shift, from say maybe when I got started. And I think mentorship is also, it doesn't end. Right. It's like I still have my go-to people that I like. Am I making the right decision? I just need to bounce this off you because our industry is complex. It's ever changing. Technology changes. People change. Expectations, rules, considerations of, like you said, equity, diversity, accessibility for neurodiverse people, and that sort of thing. And so it's always you got to have other people to keep you in check, I think, especially and it doesn't even, like you said, you are a person of color and you have your own history and your own culture, but I keep my white Australianness in check. I've put my foot in it many times by saying the wrong thing, and it's constant evolving. Aidan Lamb has a question though, which we should talk about it, and I think it's kind of along the time, like caste diversity is a huge topic at the moment, and I think I've seen that a lot in Australian sort of media as well. But have you experienced the same desire by productions to have this diversity off stage, out of the audience eye?
Ooh, this one is a little bit of a bugbear for me, because we have this push for diversity on stage. A lot of theatre companies are coming out with diversity statements, coming out with quotas, which I have no problem with quotas. In the interim, I think quotas are a means to accessibility, but also quotas are problematic because you can easily become tokenized. But a lot of these statements, they don't include stage managers or backstage crew. They include admin staff, they include executive, they include cast, but they almost never include backstage staff or stage managers. And I absolutely think that needs to change. And I think that statements should be updated to include that. Because representation matters. Like, just going back to your mentorship question, like while I don't necessarily feel like I'm ready to mentor someone else, I really hope that at least someone seeing my, Chinese brown body on this screen will be inspired to keep going at it or start it, either way. I think that it would be really, really amazing to see more diversity backstage, but I feel like that needs to come from companies as much as it comes from individuals, because individuals are still battling all these cultural, financial, socioeconomic barriers to access.
We had a very interesting panel of Asian American and Pacific Islander arts workers in America, and the situation of representation and it's a lot. It's very charged there, right? Like the issues they're very charged, and I think that what was really enlightening to me, and we spoke about it a little bit before offline, was that it's not only just the statement or the mission statement or the quotas, it's actual work. Like there has to be a lot of work to get people included into the on stage and backstage environment, right? So especially in the backstage thing, because as you spoke before, not a lot of people are going through NIDA or these cultural institutions which have that diversity and that pipeline leading into the industry. Like if they're not there, you can't hire them, right? So it has to start.
No, exactly.
It has to start.
It's got to start somewhere. Absolutely.
Yeah, a pipeline.
Like,
so,
yeah.
And one thing, I mean, awareness is one thing, and then statements is the next, right? And then the third step is action, and you being on this platform and you being a representation in the industry is important, and it's also important for me. And I think you have a lot to offer, right? So I think that that 20 years down the track, if you've got this in your mindset now, then you can encourage cultural change. So I think that's something that we all need to be conscious of, and that's not just you guys in Australia, that's us globally, right? So from a distance, and also for me, it's also important in our website, that content and that diversity and those voices speaking as well. So hopefully, Aidan, we can work on all of those things together.
Yeah, I think and I've said I've always been a great admirer of yours, and I think this platform is incredible for that as well. And because I think in Australia, even if we're not seeing a lot of Black Indigenous POC stage managers or theatre workers, to see it overseas is inspiring for us here as well, and hopefully creates more of a push, because I think that it's very easy. It could be very easy for companies to go, oh, it's too hard, or it's too expensive, or that's just not available. But if we see companies overseas doing it, they will hopefully rise to the standard that's set across the global platform.
And normalize it. I mean, I've lived all around the world, and it's been a very conscious decision of mine, even in the visuals that we put on the site, that there's diversity within that, because that's how we view the world, right? And if it was all pictures of white people in the industry, then, and we go out and actively seek these conversations. So I appreciate your passion for that topic, and we're right there with you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for spending an hour with us today, Lillian. It's been absolutely wonderful. Sorry there was a bit of a hiccup at the start.
It's okay. Thanks for having me. Before we go, I was really remiss at the start of this.
Yes, because we have to do the acknowledgement.
Because of the technical yes. I just want to acknowledge, because it's very important here in Australia, but I also think it's really important overseas, that we acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we live, work, operate. I live on Cammeraygal land. I work in Gadigal country. The Indigenous people of Australia have a really long and important tradition of storytelling, and we are privileged to be living on their unceded land.
I agree. Lillian, I wish you all the best for your impending trip to Dubai and your adventures over there. Thank you for speaking with us today. And where could people find you if they want to reach out and have any questions, chat further?
I am definitely of the Instagram generation. So you can find me on Instagram at Lillian Hannah Fish. My surname in Chinese means fish. So you can find me there, or we can probably maybe put an email up. And then you can find me in the desert in 4 days.
Amazing.
If there's any Australians in Dubai, please come find me.
We will put your Instagram on our replay email. So if anyone wants to follow you and your adventures over there in Dubai, I wish you all the best.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Anna. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Talk again soon.
All right.
Thanks everyone for joining us. Bye.